and material security. So it's pretty exciting to have everyone here. And we're going to be talking about our use of tines today. So we built a security alert system using tines. But before we get into that, for the folks that haven't met us, I'm Julie Sparks. I work, what? A little closer? That much better. Yeah. I work on the detection and response team at Brex with Josh, and we have 2 other members to our team. Jess, our manager, is here in the front row, and we have one other IC who helps us out, Daniel, but he's in Austin right now. So this is a fun photo of us when we did matching T-shirts. So that's a reason to join our team, obviously.
So, what we're kind of presenting here and talking about is like the runaway problem of security alerts, which I think a lot of teams either have experience dealing with, or if you've ever managed a team, you know that over time, like the alert volume that your teams deal with just keeps going up and up and up.
You keep going, sorry.
And this is actually like a graph of our alert volume over the past year, I think. And what we experienced at Brex is that like we really didn't do anything to make this happen. This just kind of happened as the business diversified and grew. And I think that's been my experience working at a lot of companies. And what we kind of found is that the growth of the company, the number of alerts, diversity of alerts, it really just became too difficult to manage at the scale of the team. And this is all pre-tines. This is pre-automation. This is, I don't know, back in the dark ages a little bit.
And also a team of 2 ICs for all these alerts.
These 2.
Yeah, these 2. Hello. So our company is about 1,200 employees right now, and we run a product that's completely in AWS, and then we have all the stereotypical like corporate engineering IT systems. So diverse, but more typical than people who are running on-prem infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that it's important to know, it's a good question, is like our scope. Our scope is basically the whole company, and we have hundreds of custom detections. We have, I don't know how many detection systems. So lots of diverse alerts coming into the team. Part of this problem is solving it in a way that's like very holistic and not just bespoke for an EDR or guard duty or whatever else products we have.
Yeah, and so when we started, and it was just Josh and I, we were getting all of our alerts via webhooks into Slack. And I know a lot of folks love to use Slack, but if you're thinking about scaling a team and the amount of alerts and how to handle those alerts and collecting metrics on those alerts, Slack cannot be your sole solution. So we were getting an alert in, and literally our check marks was, this alert has been handled. And the eyes are, someone is looking at it. There was no state for the alert. There was no other tracking for the alert. And we weren't able to link any automation to it. And so when there was an onslaught, you think of like, if there's an alert spike or something changes in the environment, you could wake up to an entire Slack channel filled with your worst nightmare. And so we knew that this was a problem that we were collecting, and as those alerts were increasing, we needed to think of a solution to it as soon as we had the time and prioritization to focus on it. And these are some of my favorites. So every time something went wrong, I would screenshot, there's so many of these, was, what would be great if we could suppress things? And obviously there was many other things that would be great if we had, but suppression was the #1 thing, especially if like accidentally a bad alert gets pushed, or there's a spike from something that engineering has changed that we need to be able to have the time to tune. And I think it's just like riding the wave of alert toil. I think everyone can identify with that.
Yeah, so there's not like one solution to this problem, like the runaway alert problem and the growth of the company and buying a dozen detection systems that you haven't tuned. There's a few things we talked about. Like one is we could build a SOC, right? Security Operations Center. We hire a dozen analysts. We staff them 24/7, maybe across the world. That was a quick no from our leadership. But there's other options too. You can outsource that kind of capability to an MSSP or managed security service provider. We should talk about that after the talk because I have a lot of opinions about that. But we didn't do that either. There's also like the option of just stop alerting, just descope things. Like, what if we didn't alert on every single thing that we do today? Actually, a pretty good idea, I think, still in some cases, because not every alert is equally valid.
I think the difference, though, is that problem can be handled in your detection pipeline and with a lot of other solutions, but you still need to be able to have the alert management system.
Yeah, you can't just turn things off forever if you want a job and keep your company secure. So, or you could automate things, right? And so that's what we've done here.
Yeah, and some folks might be familiar with this, which we released at Brex. It's like an overview of our ecosystem. Some folks might be familiar with Substation, which is some data pipeline infrastructure we open sourced. That's a small part of the overall ecosystem. And what we're going to be talking about today is once the alert is already generated, we already have all the context, where that goes, and how we trigger automation and other workflows that we need to do with that output. So that's where this arrow is right here.
Yeah, so I mean, we really tried to pick and build a solution that just used the things we already had. Like, we didn't want to buy new things. We didn't want to spend a lot of money. We already had Tines. We ended up using Jira for our ticketing because that's just a company-wide thing. And we used DynamoDB for managing state in the system, which we can talk about a little more at a lower level detail later. But Tines is really the thing that makes this all work. And before we had Tines, this is probably 3 to 6 months of engineering work. I don't even know.
Yeah, and then also the maintenance, right,
yeah.
of having that system. So Tines was really what allowed us to be able to approach this project.
Yeah.
For folks who have heard of SMAC methodology, amazing. Since we were building our alert system from scratch, this is something both Josh and I really admired from Rapid7, and we wanted to implement it because we have full control over how much information we collect and we process for each alert. And how that gets stored. So SMAC is status, malice, action, context, making sure that you get all the information you need to on what the alert is, how it was processed, how it was responded to, and then makes metrics and understanding your environment a lot easier. So we'll touch on how this is actually implemented further in, but this adoption has made it a lot easier for knowing where we need to tune false positives versus we're getting true positives, and just gives us a lot more context on what we should do next with our detection pipeline.
Okay, so now we're gonna go a little in the weeds. So
into the Tines story.
Yeah, I hope you're ready to look at Tines stuff, right? That's what everyone's here for. I know that's what John's here for. So we thought about just showing you the story, but it's a really big
story.
Really big.
So we're going to take out some key parts and walk through them.
We took screenshots. So basically the way the system works is receives alerts, processes alerts according to a schema, outputs alerts, applies automation, super high level description. But this is the way the alerts get in. So they always get normalized to a schema where there's always a field populated with the alert name and then a payload of the content of the alert. Critical point here is this is also when all of the metadata of the alert gets generated and normalized. So the alert name gets hashed. We use SHA-256 for that. The payload, or actually information from the payload also gets hashed. And that's how we establish context for the alert. So that context could be a server IP address or a username. It could be anything in the alert payload. And that's all defined at runtime by the engineer who's building the new alert. I mean, this is really the thing that makes everything else in the system and the automation work. So it's a really important part of it.
Yeah, and then another thing that right after the alert comes in, we implemented throttling or kind of a load balancing for the ticketing API, so in our case, Jira. So we want to make sure if there's a spike in alerts coming in that we don't lose any of those alerts, but also we don't hit any rate limiting. So for this section, we're doing a 20 alert break. So if there's anything larger than 20 alerts, then it goes into a loop until it's processed. And this has helped us when there's those giant spikes, if maybe something changes and every single endpoint in the company maybe has something that is being alerted on.
Yeah, so the thing about Jira is the rate limiting on it is really sensitive, right? And so designs like that let you work with APIs that are really sensitive, I'd say. like our Jira instance is shared by the company. So it would be a really bad day for us if we took down Jira for the company and we build things like that.
Or we broke other people's automations.
Or there's a lot of bad things that could happen. But
we're Jira Cloud.
We are Jira Cloud, yep. It's actually a good thing to raise because Jira on-prem and Jira Cloud are super different, and anyone who's ever migrated absolutely knows that. But I think the thing is, like, we still, the thing you're going to hear about in a second is that we protect the Jira API, we still generate the Jira task, but there's like a series of steps that happen before it gets assigned to someone. Because we actually generate a lot of tasks that never get assigned to anyone.
And that's for tracking purposes.
Yeah, that's for tracking.
Yeah, and so the thing back to Josh's comment is we need to be able to suppress alerts. And that's something that, we couldn't do in Slack. And even if we had just implemented things straight into Jira, there's also not good tooling to do that in Jira. But there's also two types of suppression. So if you think about a noisy alert that's coming in, maybe it's because everything in that alert needs to be tuned. Or perhaps someone is doing a behavior like they're logging in from an IP address, and it's just that user that is triggering that alert that we need to tune, or we need to look at, or have the time to investigate. So we want to suppress just that alert for that individual. So first, we have the option to do global alert suppression. So that would be like anything for that alert. We want to quiet it for an hour, 7 days. And those tasks still get generated, like Josh said, in Jira. They're just not assigned to an on-call. They don't go through the full automation. Nothing's being actioned on them, but we can still track them. And it gives the analyst who's on-call a break to actually tune and work through that alert without getting barraged. If we don't choose global suppression, the analyst also has a choice to do contextual suppression, which is based on that context hash. So based on the specific information in the payload, whether that's like the IP address and their username or something else depending on what the detection actually is. And that helps, again, for if we need to allow us some behavior, or there's a spike, someone's visiting a country they shouldn't be, but we know about it through GRC, and it gives us a little bit of a break to actually decide the next steps to make without losing any of that data or tracking. And then also implemented with this, which is really critical for us, is that we were able to introduce additional MFA. So before whoever's on call on our team actually takes an action to suppress an alert, or takes any action that is highly critical, modifies anything, this also includes for our automation workflows we talk about, they have to approve a push. And so that's not to say that we don't use MFA for everything else at our company, but just another way that we can specify that for every individual action that we think is the most important, we have an easy way to add MFA. Whether that's interacting with Jira, whether it's Slack, and that's all implemented through Times.
Yeah, and I think, suppression and deduplication are two different but really intertwined concepts, and that's where we get most of the value out of all of this. So deduplication is the idea that you get an alert, you derive the context, and the same alert comes in maybe 15 minutes or an hour later. But that first alert is still being worked by someone, or hasn't been triaged, hasn't been completed, whatever the case may be, maybe even on hold because we're collecting more information to do the investigation. The system knows that. The way it actually works is, the alert comes in, gets checked against the DynamoDB database. If there is a entry in the database that says that alert is being worked, it gets deduplicated. That's actually how suppression works too. It's all in the DynamoDB table. Yeah.
It still generates a JIRA ticket again,
yeah.
But with a duplication status. So you can actually look at a JIRA ticket and see that there's maybe 10 other alerts that came in that were deduplicated for that user. And so that you only have one JIRA ticket that the analyst gets assigned and works on.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting because an alert will come in and then you might not get to it right away, and you'll come in 5 minutes later and you'll see 10 more alerts deduplicated under it.
And you're thank God.
And it's all linked together. You don't have to look at those other ones, but then it also makes you wonder why are we getting so many alerts for this user or this system? Kind of gives the it's
more questions to answer, more projects to work on.
Yeah. Yes.
I think it also depends on how you set up detection rules in your environment. So if you look at every single event, if you look at a time slice of 15 minutes, so if your execution is your detection is executing on a 15-minute time span, but a user takes that behavior over 30 minutes, 40 minutes, that's when you're getting multiple alerts for the same thing, but you really only need to handle that once. So this is a way that we don't have to like go through and maybe necessarily change the time window on our detections, but still get that information, not barrage the analyst.
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that like all of this is in effort to never touch the detection system. Like, don't turn the alert off until someone needs to tune it. Like, just make the bleeding stop kind of thing. Like,
yeah, so we actually have the engineering time to look at, we're on V1 of our detection pipeline and we have a lot of detections and we're gonna get to V2, but we need this to stop in order to have the time as 3 ICs to come up with a version 2, something that we think is a little bit better and maybe would stop this in a different way.
Yeah. So I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but like the way the system is actually designed is it's loosely coupled on ingest. So that's how we support any alerting system. Like the alerts you just create a new story in Tines to accept the alerts from whatever the source might be. And then that story feeds it into this workflow. The other point of loose coupling is the automation. So any alert can opt in to using any automation we've built for any reason. And that's what this is. And so what happens is, it's usually in our detection build pipeline, but we'll like flag the automation that the alert should call. And what happens is it goes through this workflow. That automation is just another story in Tines, gets applied. I think the interesting thing about that automation is that it can be anything that we need. It could be collecting new information. It could be populating response actions that the person might need to take. And we can present those to the team as a single click in Jira. And then also reaching out to users, which some folks call just distributed alerting. But the other cool thing about it is like, we can use this automation to prevent alerts from getting to the team, because we can take all the information that's being enriched in the automation and just set a flag of triage or no triage. And if it says no triage, it doesn't go to the team. But the automation is still added to the ticket. It's still like, you can still check it in Jira. So
it's really critical for like later implementing like a distributed alerting, and then also thinking of how some detections, maybe they have an end state that doesn't involve anyone. So making sure that it goes through the entire automation pipeline, without ever like touching anyone on our team. And that's helpful when you're like partnering with like GRC, other teams that do want alerts, but they have like a very straightforward answer to what action should be taken. And that doesn't really necessarily need a person.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, the funny thing is, this is just like an alert management system. It is not even like a detection and response system. It can take any kind of alert. Anything you want to deduplicate, suppress, or automate, this can handle it.
And obviously we use Tines for like a security purpose, but being able to like take in an alert, load balance it, deduplicate, suppress it, like could also be used by infrastructure teams, could be used by a large variety of people.
Yep.
And then this is the end state that we wanted to kind of talk through for an alert, but 3 really important things happen. So once that alert is created in Jira, if it is a triage state, so it actually needs someone to look at it, it's not been suppressed, not been deduplicated, it looks for the information of the person who's on call. And it fills in that information, it assigns it to them, and then it looks at what priority that ticket should be. So right now, all of our tickets are default low priority, but we wanted to implement the feature. So in the future, we could do some sort of risk-based alerting where it would look at the context ID for that alert, and then it would change the priority on the ticket depending on that. And so that's kind of the first step for us, is to just have that option, and that's like V2, we can implement it. And then the third thing is actually having SLIs. And so I'll let Josh talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so you know, by now you're probably getting the idea that like this is a pretty complex system, and kind of is. I think it's like,
kind of.
Yeah, I mean it definitely is, but you know, I'm trying to think how many actions it is. It's like 300 to 400 actions spread across like a dozen stories. So we have to monitor it like we would any production system. Like we want to know when it is having an outage, because that's really bad for our team. You know, at Brex we use SLOs, and we use SLIs to measure those SLOs. So, SLO, service level objective. It's in the Google SRE workbook. I won't try to quote the workbook to you, it's quite long. But it's a way to measure, you know, the reliability of your system, right? And so we built that into this system, like in multiple places where, you know, we send an alert in, we expect some output to come out. And if nothing comes out, then something obviously is broken. And so the way we've implemented that is just yet another action in Tines that sends a metric to our SIM that we monitor for the SLO.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is we're not relying on Tines per se to tell us when there's maybe like a failure or a difference that we need to address, but we're making sure that we get that information proactively as well.
Yeah. The last thing I'll say about this, because this is the last slide where we show the story, is that like, this is like a product built in Tines. This is like, we could, this is a thing. This is like something
it has a life of its own.
Yeah, this is the life of its own.
It actually has a name. We call it our coworker Amanda.
Yeah, it's called Amanda. I didn't know we were going to talk about that, but yeah, I mean, I think it's really important to say, like, you can build some really massive, like, impressive systems with Tines. Like, it's
and
never...
take like a quarter of the engineering time that it might take for something larger.
Yeah.
That's not in Tines.
Yeah.
So you're probably all wondering what Jira looks like. We want to take a minute. So like when the ticket, we looked at the Tines, when it actually is coming into Jira, this is an example of what it looks like. So our Tines service account is creating the ticket, but as you can see, no one is actually assigned. And you can see the duplicate suppression, they're all linked together. So this is showing that it's actually doing the work that we need it to do.
Yeah, and so we're going to see an example of this in a little more context later, but the way we do the automation is it's just the first comment on the task. So the automation, like, again, can be anything.
Yeah, you could be getting event context information. It could be a link for the on-call person to take an action, which would prompt the MFA and then execute the action without them ever logging into the UI. So we have this actually with material security, so that we can like triage some phishing tasks. And then also with, what else do we have?
We have a lot of stuff.
Yeah, we have a lot of stuff. But it's really convenient because we don't actually have to be logging into each individual UI of a product that we might use.
Yeah, I mean, the goal is like, you get the alert as the task and everything you need is there. That's the ideal state, right? So. And
so this is a little bit of a reminder of those Slack messages before. And we talked a little bit about why this is a problem, but also think about when there's an alert spike. And so our end result with a more detailed Jira ticket is we have those hashes we were talking about, we have the context information. We're also able to implement that SMAC methodology as custom Jira labels and pull metrics. So we're actually like I'm currently working on it, need to finish it, a task to pull metrics automatically via Tines and deliver it to Slack. So instead of all those metrics being just in a Slack channel, they're all in Jira. We can like pull them, do formulas on them, pull different types of information, then just deliver it to our team via Slack. So simplifies the process a lot. And then we have these like suppression links for the on-call to take if they notice an alert needs to be suppressed.
Yeah, I think it's worth calling out that like our team is small, so we built the system and we use the system and we make it better. But you could end up in a scenario where you have an engineering team managing the system and you have analysts using it, and they're two different groups. And so what we do is we try to present the options to like the team, who is us, as simply as possible. So it's one click for everything, right? One click to suppress, one click to pivot to a timeline, one click to do everything.
Yeah, and as we were building the system, we were also the ones, using it. So when we first implemented it, I was like, oh gosh, when I'm stressed, I forget what global versus contextual suppression is. So let's make sure the definition is in there. So like, I can't mess it up if there's like a spike in alerts. And it's kind of like just making sure it's like super obvious. Because imagine if you're responding to something and someone pings you at like 8 p.m. at night. Like, again, you want it to be as straightforward as possible. And we get to test that ourselves because we are the ones on call.
Yeah, so our performance now is a little better than it was before. If you recall the graph that just kept going up forever.
Yeah, and this time slice is per day.
Yeah, this is per day. So you kind of get a sense of like the volume we're dealing with. But what's not really represented here is like what it actually looks like when it's doing its job really well, which is deduplicating and suppressing, which I think you'll see on the next slide.
Yeah, so we actually had a spike. And so we had almost 1,200 alerts total that came in over 24 hours. And that was because corporate engineering pushed a new script to endpoints, and it triggered alerts as something suspicious for macOS. And so it triggered an alert for every laptop in the company. But not only were we able to suppress it, but we were able to use the system very accurately, and it stopped making JIRA tickets at 148. And that was because we were realizing that that was alerts that we were already getting, so not just the macOS, but also alerts that were related to the corporate engineering script, but different because people had different configurations set up.
Yeah, I think the thing that's like everyone who's done this kind of work knows is that like you can't control the business, right? Like you can't control other teams. These things will just happen. And that's like one of the major motivations of why we built this thing. Right?
Yeah, and I was on call, so I was very happy that it stopped at 148 instead of hitting 1100.
Yeah. So, you know, we also track time saved. And that's really important for like expressing to managers and leadership, like how you're using the system, the value you get out of it.
Why we're paying for it.
Why you bought it, you know, it's always, yeah. Anyway, so we actually track time saved a few different ways. We track it according to the story. So there's like logistical things like just engineering automation. There's response automation, like, you know, restricting access to an account, something like that. Then there's triage automation. So most of the output and what you see on this graph, so the green bar there, that's all the time saved in the alert system. I think we're averaging at least 8 hours a week right now, time saved. Yeah.
Yeah, now that's fully implemented, somewhere between 6 and 10 hours. It's pretty typical. But in comparison, when we had that alert spike, it was more like 250 hours. So we like estimated that if like someone had taken those alerts and had to look at each one of them for a couple minutes in order to triage them, close them out, etc., that would have taken, aka me, 250 hours that I was able to save just from the alert management system, and not even using any of the automation or other tooling that we have outside of Tines.
Yeah, because what's the alternative, right? You just ignore the alerts. Because if you get 1,000 alerts, no analyst is going to spend the time really going into each one, reviewing each one in detail to make sure something bad didn't happen. Like they're just going to start clicking to make them go away. That's what we want to avoid. So yeah, 210 alerts in the last 2 months. A fair number were deduplicated and suppressed. I mean, 20% is kind of the rolling average we've seen week to week.
Yeah, and that's without the spike factored in. So that's just like a typical week.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to know that, like, you know, we're not a SOC, so we don't have someone there responding to every alert every time, and that does contribute to the to that percentage. And it can, you know, handle the 1,000 alerts at once kind of thing you see occasionally.
Yeah. So this is a project from last half, so like the end of 2022. But going into this year, we're also looking at planning for the custom priority-based risk-based alerting. So that would be actually implementing both on our detection side to make sure that detections have a risk associated with them, and then that also that would be picked up and executed within this alert management system so that it would represent in the JIRA ticket. We also have it on our list to do distributed alerting. So for those alerts that can be approved by an individual user, they get a Slack message. That information is tied back to that JIRA ticket. We do want to be able to do more unique automation for each alert. Right now we have some automation workflows, but not nearly as many as we could have. And those all exist within Tines, or we'll be building them in Tines, so they just need to be linked to the alerts that we need them to be. We already enforce MFA for high impact actions, but as we build more, we want to make sure that we're incorporating that so that there's no chance one of us gets compromised and then an attacker can go in and use all of our automation workflows.
Yeah, so you know, our takeaways anyway, kind of doing this project and learning, right, about how you build a scalable alert management system. Like, in my opinion, Slack isn't the right solution for alert management. I'd be curious to learn if anyone else feels similarly or differently. But for us, it just wasn't it. I truly think that like deduplication and suppression, like in the system, is the real winner here. Like, I've never seen a product that does it. Like in the SIM, like we can talk about that afterward if you'd like more information on how all that works. But I used to work for a few vendors, so I can tell you a little bit about it. the triage automation, I think, to Julie.
Say what the vendor is. I approve.
You approve? Okay.
Tuckner, don't interrupt the speakers.
To Julie's point, like the triage automation is where a lot of the value is, but it also takes a lot of effort. So we try to like find automation that can apply to like multiple classes of alerts and reuse that. And I think like the biggest takeaway I had is like you can build like really big custom stuff in Tines, and I hadn't really never thought about that before doing this.
Yeah, if you think of the marketing use cases, they'll be like, well, like make sure that you can automate use with like CrowdStrike, you can automate your usage with Wiz, etc.
Yeah.
But like you could also just build an entire system that you could have also built in AWS, but would have required a ton more management.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the important point, right? Is that, like this system handles every alert from every detection system. And my manager is putting her hand up right now for some reason.
What's the incremental, how much more does this cost us after you build the system?
Oh, like nothing, like $5 a month maybe in DynamoDB costs. I mean, that's the other thing too, right? Is we use the things we already had. We had Tines, we had Jira.
Yeah, we have unlimited stories.
Yeah, I mean, that will change the design of a system like this depending on how many stories you have, but you can work around that limitation. So.
Yeah.
So somebody had to build DynamoDB setup. Who did that?
That's me.
That's not Tines.
Well, no.
That's you.
Well, I mean, it's,
That's a key piece of this. You're not going to deduplicate without that.
No, I mean,
That's true.
so that's the thing, right? You're also not going to do it without a ticketing system because Tines isn't a ticketing system either, right? You need Jira.
Well, Tines does hook to Jira.
Well, it also hooks to DynamoDB. Yeah.
It doesn't provide you the database schema.
Well, no, I understand that. Yeah. I mean, so the design. I mean, so one thing we didn't talk about is how much time we spent designing this thing, right?
Too much time.
We spent like over a month just designing it. And that includes like, what does the table look like? That includes what do the metrics look like when they get emitted? How do you monitor it? What's shocking is if you looked at the design of what we have in our document, like the workflow, and then looked at the Tines story, they're almost identical. So
I'll also say we use DynamoDB a lot on our team for other things as well. So it was a really easy thing for us to add to be like, okay, well, we want to store this information outside of Tines. We use DynamoDB pretty heavily. Let's just adopt it. And we already had those actions built out. Yeah.
I will say something that might get John in trouble, which is you could probably do the same thing in Tines with global variables, but I wouldn't do it. It would be a bad idea. John agrees it's a bad idea, but you could do it in Tines. It's about picking the right solution for the problem.
And your organization, what tools you have available.
Yeah, and DynamoDB just happened to be the right one for us, but not an explicit requirement. You could trade it for another type of database.
So would you say that Tines is no code? You didn't spend any time coding?
I don't think this has code in it. Not like in the traditional sense.
Yeah, not in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
But I would say that it helped a lot having an engineering background to build out such a complex system. I don't think that if I had no engineering background, I would want to do a system like this in Tines. I would stick to the typical Tines use cases. But as an engineering heavy team, like all three of us on the team really enjoy building things. We could use Tines to build everything that we would have built outside of Tines. And it took us a quarter of the time.
Yeah, I think like if you recall back to the throttling and the circuit breaking slide, like that's just a traditional like software engineering pattern, right? Building a circuit breaker, building a way to like do exponential throttling, like and retry strategies, like we like build in Tines like it's code.
Yeah,
it's something we didn't cover at all and probably don't have time to, but
if you want to talk to us more about it. But
Yeah.
I think coming from backgrounds where we're both familiar with building traditional solutions, you implement those same practices and then those just make your security engineering systems better, right?
Yeah.
Because like a lot of times companies will have a software engineers embedded in a security team that will build solutions for them. We don't have that. We use Tines and we build it ourselves, but we're still trying to use those best practices, trying to design the system like it would if we had a software engineering team building it for us.
Mm-hmm.
You guys are also like Go developers, and how do you pick and choose which solution you use for what?
Let's go to the appendix. You guys, just so you can
Jeez,
just so you can take this in while we talk.
Yeah. Actually, if you want to learn more about what we do and the way we do it and all that.
So actually a version of this talk in a more technical deep dive got posted on our blog, the Brex Engineering blog this morning. So for folks who couldn't attend, or if you want to like look at it again without having to take notes, highly recommend it. It is like a 15-minute read at least. So it goes pretty deep into like why we chose and what was needed to make these decisions. And then for folks who aren't familiar with our just like overall tech stack, there is a threat detection ecosystem blog out, and then our substation repo, highly recommend giving it a look. And then the SMAC methodology that I mentioned, Rapid7 has a good article where they go in depth into it.
Yeah, but so John's question is, when do you choose to build through software and traditional code versus Tines? And for us, if it's automation, it's Tines, and that's pretty much it. Like it's a really easy decision to make because we learned really fast when we first started using it that it's really easy to have an idea and see it work in the product. There are limitations, like anything. You kind of have to pick and choose. Like like the substation project is a high volume event, like ingest and transformation system. And it's probably too high volume for Tines, is what I would guess. Like it's handling hundreds of thousands of events per second. Tines is probably better in the range of hundreds to thousands of events per second, handling those kinds of bursts. But like we really try to use Tines as the first class solution in a lot of automation that we're building.
Trying to get out of the habit of building custom one-off things, having everything live in Tines, and then also the ability to share those stories that we build or give viewer access to folks on other teams within Brex. So we have other security teams that also use the solution, can also work alongside us. And so that really, really helps as well. Because on our team, a lot of our code is private to just our team. But Tines give us also the collaboration aspect for some of our more operational and automation stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, that's a really great point because not every team that we work with can just build a project like Substation from scratch or whatever. Can just like sling some Go code. So we build the stories in Tines and we build them in a way where they're functional and reusable by others. So every story we build is, in theory, like leveling up others and they can just rely on that story.
Reuse it, modify it a little bit. For anyone that has used Tines stories, they're really easy to copy and modify a little bit and make it fit your use case. And what's been really cool is like as we've been using Tines over time, there's been a lot of stories that we've collaborated with the Tines team on, and then now those stories are being reused with other people at Brex, other people at other companies. So I do really love that aspect, whereas other security engineers maybe aren't like just looking at GitHub repos all day trying to find something they can reuse and modify. Tines is a much more friendly solution to jump into, especially if you only have like an hour or two to build something.
Go for it.
Have you seen any automation envy in other departments like DevOps?
Yeah. Well,
we're doing performance conversations. I was talking about my team's accomplishments, and I get a quiet message from someone who goes, "Can you send me the design doc for that?"
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question because it actually makes me think of a different problem too. But let me address the question first, which is like yes, because we're at our company we're very writing heavy culture, right? We write a lot of design docs, we write a lot of decision documents, and so it's really easy to share that with another team and say like, look, we built this in Tines. It's really easy to help you build something similar, or you can just use our thing. So there is the envy there. The other thing I've noticed is like, it's like any kind of like pipeline where some product's moving down it, right? Like we kind of like we've unclogged our team and just moved the clog further in the pipeline to where now we can really easily send emails to our GRC team. Whenever we see something that's not malicious, but they need to know about, and we can just funnel those emails to them like instantly.
But they can't respond to
They can't respond to it instantly because they don't use Tines. So it kind of, it's kind of made me see like the inefficiencies in the organization.
I will also say that we really want other teams. We pay for unlimited stories. We want other people to use Tines as well. There are some departments who have already made those automation decisions before we start using Tines or before we start talking about it. So there's a bit of friction. Like, I don't know if they're going to move to Tines if we show them that we're doing it well enough, or if they're going to continue on their own like automation journey. That's kind of the hard part about having like separate orgs, right? Security's in one, IT or maybe engineering's in another. But we do want people to use more of it and kind of reuse the stuff we've already built because we found that it works.
Yeah, I think we've found value in being internal advocates for the system too. You know, offering to help people build things, showing them how to build things, that kind of stuff.
How big an impact on your design choices do you think it would have been if you guys did not have unlimited stories?
Probably, I have to talk to John about the technical aspects of that, but I would think not that much.
It would have changed how we designed it, but we still could have done it.
Yeah, but that's the thing. It's like the design would be different, but the outcome would be the same, if that makes sense. Like, there are limitations that you can get around. But because we do have the unlimited stories, we've really just leaned into this idea of a story is like a function or in code, or a story is like a Unix command, right? It does one thing really well, and it can be reused in any combination of other things.
And they like design for the alert management. If you weren't using tines, for example, and you wanted to put more effort into it, you could write a bunch of lambdas and you could use a DynamoDB and you could have things execute, and it just wouldn't be as easy to maintain, as quick to develop. But like the principles still work.
Yeah. So I think you can make it work, but you know, it's a different design. That's all.
Yeah.
Do you use like the built-in time version control, or do you come up with something else?
We use the built-in tines version control. Yeah, very happy you guys implemented that. Happy customer.
Related question: what's your iteration process like? Like, you have something live that's running in production on your instance, but how do you develop or add new features? Do you have like an internal testing phase?
This has been live for like a month and a half. So we haven't really had much iteration yet, but I think we've been talking about spinning up a dev instance of Times.
Well, I mean, yeah, like, so the thing is, like, there's a lot of different ways to test in dev and stuff like that, right? You can do it in production in a way where just by like the flow, like you can add an event to a production flow that is dev, right? And then you play it through the system and you just emit it as a dev event. We've got like fully separated like Jira project as well for dev work. So we would probably just make a copy of the story. You can copy between the stories. You can export, import. Like, there's a lot of different solutions. There's the dev, like having a whole different tenant for dev.
Yeah.
Like, there's a lot of like, I don't know. This is a lot, like, that question. You know, something we tried to spend a lot of time figuring out when we first started using the system is like, how do we test things? How do we keep it?
Yeah. There's
stable?
also with Times, like when you're making like PRs and you have code, like you are looking for software best practices when you're building things. But with Times, like it's kind of turning that process on its head. So like, how do you make sure that you're still doing those software engineering best practices in Times and in Times stories, and how things are reused? And we spent a lot of time thinking about that as well when we first started with Times. And we have like an internal working doc where we're like, we're going to use send a story because that mimics how you would do a function, and you would not have everything running in the same function. And those are things that are like hard and you kind of have to pay attention to, but we've had so many conversations on different aspects of how to implement those things in Times to make sure that we're not making something that's unsustainable or bad practice.
We do a lot of what I would call integration testing, if that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have just one team using Times, like your team, or do you have other teams, and how do you do feedback in Times?
We're the main consumers of Times. We're the main users. We also have a corporate security team that builds some automations. So like everyone else uses Times in a more like typical use case way, so one-off automation work. InfraSec also uses Times. IT is starting to use Times as well. So we have some other teams that we're trying to get in and have some stories and such, but we're still the main users.
So how are you managing access and like?
Just our regular access request process, and then we'll go in and make the accounts for them.
Yeah, are you asking about access to the stories or access within a story?
So I'm thinking more like, how do you make sure that they don't sabotage what you're doing?
Oh yeah, we use different teams, like the teams structure, the role-based access control in Times, and then there's a whole different, like, you can give a whole other talk on how you actually manage access between stories and all that. Like, it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
So you figured that out.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Thankfully, we figured how to keep other people from breaking our stuff.
Yeah, we don't want people
Figured
breaking our
that part out.
things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we give a lot of product feedback to Times too as we were building and things, and they were really quick to make features that kind of solve some of the problems that we didn't really want to, fix on our own by building custom stuff.
Yeah.
One question probably is around like all the interactions, right? Where are we storing these secrets, right? For times, like I'm guessing this workflow has a bunch of them for the process that goes through in here and things like that, right?
Yeah.
Is that pulled from an external source or is that kept in time?
It's used the what do you guys call it? The credentials in Times. Yeah.
Yeah, like environment variables
Yeah.
that are encrypted.
Although it doesn't actually use as many secrets as you'd think. This is a good question, right? It's access to Jira, access to AWS, which we use role-based access control for that. And that might be it. Like some of the other services.
Like some API tokens.
Yeah.
But nothing like, and they're all like write access to like very secured down stories. So like they can only like do like maybe like our testing project or just like one project within Jira.
Yeah.
This is pretty low risk.
One of the things you have to think about when you're like building these automations and the sensitivity and impact of them is like who has access to it, right? Like what's the impact of someone getting a hold of this and not knowing what they're doing? Like, could they take down production? Could they, isolate a host that they shouldn't have isolated? That kind of stuff. We spent a lot of time thinking about that before we ever even attempted this project.
Yeah, and it's important to note this is like the alert management. So the alert exists outside of the system. So if this entire system were to go down or someone compromised it, all of our alert data is still in a database. We can still triage alerts manually. We can pull up all that context information. We're just not getting the benefits of the suppression and the deduplication.
Yeah. Is it time?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Cool. If you have questions, come up to us. We're friendly, I swear.